Yeah, I've talked to people in the past. What are your thoughts on this of certain microbes pair better with certain crops, hence no crop rotation? So if you always grew, say, tomatoes, you always grew tomatoes in this area, the microbes in that area would favor tomatoes. And so you'd get a robust community for that crop. But then let's say you did crop rotation, which a lot of people advise, and you bring in onions, which you referenced before. Now it's like, oh, everything here was set up for tomatoes. Now onions are in place, and it's a new species relationship. Is what are your thoughts on that whole theory of
Mhm.
leaving one crop in place to make a more robust microbial community, or it doesn't matter, you can rotate, it's all going to work out?
Yeah, I mean, so I study mycorrhizal fungi pretty much exclusively, but I come from a lab whose entire background is in plant soil feedback, so they think more broadly about the whole soil community. And for many of these lands that might only plant one crop over and over and over again, what they tend to see is a decline in biomass, not necessarily because of the AM fungal communities changing, but it's thought more of pathogen accumulation of pathogens that are specialists on those crops. So that's one of the main reasons that people do rotate things like corn and soy every other year to avoid those pathogens, which can overwhelm the benefits of any microbial community that accumulate depending on the kind of pathogen and what it might do to those plant hosts.
So rotation's probably better than
Rotation is generally better. Yeah.
yeah.
Another thing, if you think about diversity in a space, that also can eliminate this high pathogen accumulation. So if you think about a prairie grassland, these plants live for 100 years, some of them, in that same exact soil. And why pathogens don't necessarily overwhelm that plant is because of all this diversity that's happening in the soil and the complex interactions of all those different biota. So there has been some research looking at diversification in crop plantings. I worked for the Land Institute for a few years when I first moved to Kansas as a postdoc, and they think about things like intercropping. So not having an entire field of your cereal, whatever that might be, wheat or corn, but intercropping that with a legume and maybe more than one crop. And those things can help eliminate those high accumulations of pathogens as well.
You have perennials living for 100 years that are herbaceous. So this is not a tree. Why can some people not get a tomato plant to live a full season? What's the difference there? Is it the domestication of some of these species and improvements we've made over time to the plant to get our intended yield? Why are some vegetative or cash crops for humans so susceptible to disease when you have naturalized plants living 100 years? That just
Mm-hmm.
seems insane.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of domestication, I think we picked annuals because annuals tend to reproduce every year, right? They have to. If they're not, that's a major problem for an annual plant. And the things that they do when they're reproducing tend to be what we eat, right? So grass, corn, an annual that we selected, we chose it because we wanted something that would make kernels every year for us to eat. So that's a great thing. So we tend to focus on these weedier plant species that are making fruits almost immediately. And yeah, that might not be so great for us in the long run. But there are some groups thinking about shifting from annual plantings to more perennial plantings. The Land Institute is one of those. They work with this grain called kernza, which is a perennial grain. And you can plant it and it can sit there more like a prairie plant, not for hundreds of years, but many years. And you don't have to till it, you don't have to replant it, and it can continue to make grain season after season. So there's been some success with some of these grains. They're working with an oilseed crop and a legume. They've had some major success with perennializing rice in China. So there are some steps moving towards that direction. And the role of the microbiome in perennializing agriculture, I think, is going to be huge.